The ballroom at the MGM Grand had been converted into a press hall, and the air carried the weight of lights and expectation. Reporters sat shoulder to shoulder in neat rows, their laptops open, recorders lined up on the edge of the tables like weapons. Bright banners stretched across the stage, logos of sponsors, promises of the fight of the year, glossy images of two faces placed side by side. Cameras clicked in restless bursts, capturing any twitch, any grin, any gesture that might sell. In the middle of it all, the young Brazilian fighter leaned back in his chair, the tailored lines of his dark suit catching every flash. His hair was slick, his smile wide, and he played to the room like a seasoned showman. He adjusted his cufflinks, leaned toward the mic, and waited for the question he knew would come. It arrived, delivered by a reporter who didn't even need to check his notes. "What about Chuck Norris? He's the name everyone keeps bringing up. Do you respect what he's done?" The Brazilian's smile sharpened. He leaned closer, the microphone catching the deliberate pause before his words. "Norris," he said, rolling the name like it was a joke he'd told before. "He's just an old actor." "I'll make him quit in 30 seconds, laughter erupted. Some of it was nervous, some complicit, but it filled the hall. The fighter seized it, rising half out of his chair to demonstrate. He mimed a quick grab, a sharp twist, and let his hand snap down as if breaking an invisible arm. "That's all it takes," he said, grinning as he dropped back into his seat. Snap! Over a handful of journalists clapped, and one even whistled. The cameras caught every second. Clips were online before the press conference even ended. The line traveled faster than the sound system itself. On Twitter, hashtags flared. Number 30 seconds. Number old actor. Number break the legend. Memes multiplied. One showed a clock stopping at half a minute. Another showed the words 30 seconds versus eternity. Young fans piled into the comments, cheering their man, mocking the past. But the reaction wasn't unanimous. Older voices, quieter but sharper, filled threads with grainy clips. Chuck in his prime, winning titles in dusty gyms, sweat-soaked uniforms, referees raising his hand. Others posted screenshots of him training military units, instructing police officers, moments pulled from real life rather than film. "Just an actor," one caption asked, paired with a photo of Norris standing on a podium decades earlier, medal around his neck. By the next morning, sports radio was saturated. Callers, split by age, argued from opposite ends of the spectrum. The younger ones spoke of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, the modern game, the speed and science of it. The older voices carried a different weight. Stories of the 70s and 80s, of karate tournaments, of discipline taught in strip mall dojos by instructors who all seemed to have one poster on the wall. Chuck, mid-kick, frozen in time. When journalists finally turned to Chuck Norris himself, cameras waited, lenses sharpened, hoping for a rebuttal, a flash of anger, maybe a joke. He sat at a table, hands folded, posture calm. He looked directly at the camera lens, not at the room around him. The pause was long enough to make people lean forward, uncertain if he'd answer at all. Then he spoke, his voice steady. "A minute," he said, "is long enough for a man to learn the difference between a show and the truth." He didn't say another word. He didn't need to. The press room erupted in 100 different directions. Some laughed, others gasped, and a few reporters shot out the door to call their editors. By nightfall, that one sentence had replaced the 30-second boast. Headlines stretched it in bold type. TV anchors replayed it with slow zooms. Clips on social media looped endlessly, every platform pushing the line with captions like, "The legend speaks," or 60 seconds to truth. The Brazilian kept talking, giving interviews, promising fireworks, but his voice already sounded like background noise compared to the silence that had followed Chuck's words. That silence became the loudest statement of all. Just wondering, where are you watching from? Write it down, bellow. The line, "A minute is long enough," didn't fade after the press conference. It grew legs and walked into every corner of conversation. Sports radio replayed it hourly, looping the pause before and after, dissecting his tone as if it were scripture. Morning shows debated it over coffee cups. In online forums, threads split into trenches. Old-school martial artists quoting tournament results from the 70s, Jiu Jitsu practitioners mocking movie karate. Younger fans carried memes like flags. One showed the Brazilian snapping a pencil with the caption, "30 seconds of reality." Another stitched Chuck's quote under an hourglass, "draining slow." The text reading, "Truth takes time." Arguments boiled under every post. Age wasn't the only fault line, but it was the deepest. Teenagers mocked nostalgia. Men in their 50s wrote paragraphs about discipline, about respect, about watching Norris fight live in small gyms long before Hollywood. Inside his training hall, the Brazilian fed the fire. Cameras crowded around as he shadowboxed, grinning wide. Sweat slicked his dark hair, but his voice never lost its ease. "He won't even warm up," he told reporters between combinations. "I'll put him down, shake his hand, send him home." 30 seconds, maybe less. Why should we waste time? He mimed a quick choke, laughing, letting the journalists laugh with him. Every boast became another headline. Meanwhile, footage trickled from Texas. Chuck trained in a bare gym, no banners, no slogans. The walls were plain, the mats scuffed, the light harsh. He said nothing to the camera. No jokes, no boasts. He stretched carefully, leaned deep into each muscle. He worked combinations on the heavy bag with measured rhythm, fists thudding in a cadence that carried more weight than words. Between rounds, he breathed slow, eyes fixed on nothing, as though the noise outside didn't exist. Clips leaked online, shaky phone recordings from bystanders allowed inside. They weren't meant as promotion. That made them hit harder. "This doesn't look like a man chasing a show," one comment read, retweeted thousands of times. "This looks like someone preparing to teach." The contrast hardened the split. On Instagram, the Brazilian posted glossy training reels, sweat shining under perfect lighting, music pounding under his voice. "Don't miss it." "I'm going to break a legend," fans poured in emojis of fire, broken chains, shattered clocks. His bravado wasn't just confidence, it was branding. Chuck posted nothing. His accounts stayed silent. And the silence wasn't emptiness, it was gravity. People filled it with speculation, with reverence, with worry. "What's he hiding?" asked the loud voices. "What's he waiting for?" asked the quieter ones. The promoter couldn't have scripted it better. Ticket sales surged. Hotels on the Strip filled. Sports books listed odds with the Brazilian as the heavy favorite. But the money was split. Some bet on youth, speed, modern ground game. Others put down cash like prayer, like respect owed, trusting history to repeat itself. The night before the fight, the Brazilian went live on social media, sitting in his suite high above the neon strip. Behind him, the city pulsed, lights chasing lights. He leaned toward the phone, smile sharp. "Tomorrow night," he said, "history ends. I'll make it quick. I'll make it clean. Chuck Norris will tap in less than a minute." He held up a stopwatch, let it tick 30 seconds, and grinned. "Don't blink." The clip spread overnight like gasoline on dry ground. Even people who hadn't followed fights in decades shared it, some with laughter, some with anger. Sports pages wrote headlines as if the result were already fact. The air felt thick with inevitability, and through it all, Chuck said nothing. No response, no retort. He finished his last workout, cooled down, left the gym under a fading sun. Neighbors saw him driving home, window down, the smell of cut grass drifting in from lawns still damp from sprinklers. He waved once to a boy on a bike. That was all. The silence became unbearable for some, intoxicating for others. In a world where every boast demanded a reply, his refusal to play became part of the fight. The crowd, the third character in the story, wasn't just waiting for a bout anymore. They were waiting for an answer to their own noise, and the answer wouldn't come in words. Las Vegas breathed neon that night. The Strip pulsed with traffic, headlights dragging white scars across the asphalt. Crowds pressed outside the arena, phones lifted high, voices chasing one another in a dozen languages. Ticket lines wrapped around the block, even though the event was already sold out. Inside, the air buzzed with anticipation. Beer, perfume, sweat, and the faint tang of electrical heat from the lights overhead. The arena itself was dressed like a cathedral to spectacle. Giant screens hung from the rafters, looping highlight reels, commentators' faces, sponsors flashing their logos in endless repetition. The crowd was restless, standing in pockets, chanting names, arguing across aisles. The atmosphere wasn't casual entertainment. It was charged, ready to ignite. The music hit, deep bass pounding through the floor. The young Brazilian burst from the tunnel, suit jacket traded for fight shorts and a warm-up robe. His grin was wide, his confidence rehearsed. He strutted down the ramp, slapping hands, arms stretched as if the entire arena belonged to him. His fans screamed, a wave of flags and banners shaking in the upper tiers. Some had painted 30 seconds across their bare chests. Others mimed breaking sticks, laughing, jeering. The Brazilian fed them energy. He jogged sideways halfway down the ramp, spinning, bowing dramatically before throwing shadow punches into the hot air. He raised his fists, then tapped his wrist like checking a watch, smirking at the cameras. Commentators leaned in, repeating his promise. 30 seconds. The screens above magnified his face until it towered over the crowd, lit in sweat and certainty. When he climbed into the ring, he didn't pace quietly. He circled the canvas like a man staking his claim, fingers brushing the ropes, gaze sweeping the audience. He mouthed words toward the cameras, "Watch close." History ends tonight, and his fans roared back. He was already celebrating, already convinced. Then the lights cut. A blackout swallowed the noise for a second, broken only by the red dots of phones still recording. The sudden silence was like a vacuum, pulling the breath out of the building. For a heartbeat, the only sound was a restless shuffle of thousands of feet. On the giant screens, a grainy montage began to roll. Black and white clips of karate tournaments decades old. Norris, with his hand raised, sweat dripping. Quick cuts to military demonstrations, him instructing rows of soldiers, sharp commands followed by precise movements. Training footage from the 80s, his form crisp, his expression focused. The crowd didn't cheer at first. They watched. Then the applause swelled, layered with whistles, chants, the sound of history reasserting itself. And then he appeared. Chuck Norris walked out in a plain GI, belt tied neat, barefoot, nothing fancy. No pyrotechnics, no music track. Just his presence, steps steady on the ramp, eyes fixed on the ring. He didn't wave, he didn't grin. He didn't need to. The ovation crashed like surf against rock, loud, then louder, until people were on their feet without realizing. The contrast was stark. One man had played to the cameras, basked in lights. The other had walked out as if into a dojo, where the only thing that mattered was respect. Inside the ring, the Brazilian waited, smirking, tapping his wrist again, then pantomiming a break with his hands. The crowd booed this time, pockets of noise drowning out his gesture. Chuck stepped through the ropes, touched the canvas lightly with his foot, then stood still in his corner. He bowed slightly toward the referee, then straightened, his face calm. When the referee called them to the center, the arena hushed again. The air seemed to vibrate. The two fighters stood inches apart, their gazes locked. The Brazilian leaned close enough that the microphones didn't catch it. "Old man," he whispered, lips curled in confidence. "I'll snap you like a twig." He mimed the gesture again, quick and sharp. Chuck's reply was audible to everyone, though his voice stayed low. "Real strength doesn't need jokes." The crowd reacted instantly, half with cheers, half with stunned silence. The referee's voice cut through, rattling off rules neither man cared about. Cameras zoomed, phones tilted higher. The moment stretched, elongated by tension. The referee raised his hand to signal the start. The arena rose with him, thousands standing, every throat tight. The fighters stepped back to their corners, but their eyes never broke apart. The timekeeper reached for the bell, and the realization settled like a storm cloud. People had come expecting a show, something flashy, maybe even farcical. But in those final seconds before the fight began, everyone understood. This wasn't spectacle. It was about to become a lesson. The bell rang sharp, metallic, final. For the first instant after, the sound seemed to cut the air in two. Then the arena roared. It wasn't cheering so much as an earthquake made of throats. Tens of thousands of voices colliding into one wall of noise that shook the rafters. The floor vibrated, beer sloshed in cups, phones wobbled in raised hands. But inside the ropes, it was different. Between those four corners, the noise thinned into something tighter, a vacuum of focus. Two men, two bodies, one silence that had more weight than the roar surrounding it. The Brazilian didn't waste a second. He sprang forward, legs coiled like springs, arms shooting low, trying to wrap Chuck's waist. It was the move everyone expected. The speed, the takedown, the dominance he had bragged about for weeks. His grin was wide, confident, almost mocking. He could already picture the headlines, 30 seconds to legend broken. Chuck did not meet force with force. He stepped back once, just enough. His shoulders turned, his hips rotated half a degree, and the hands that reached for him closed on air. The movement was so small, the cameras nearly missed it. To some in the cheap seats, it looked like luck. To anyone who had ever trained, it looked like geometry. The crowd gasped, then roared louder. The Brazilian recovered immediately, spinning back, pushing again. He barked as he lunged, the sound primal, raw, feeding off adrenaline. His fists jabbed, his arms reached, his body was all forward momentum. He smelled victory, the way a shark smells blood. Chuck slipped each attempt with a minimal pivot. One step to the left, one angle to the right, a simple shift backward. No wasted energy. His hands stayed high, elbows tight. His breathing didn't change. The calm radiating from him contrasted with the storm crashing toward him. And the contrast began to rattle the edges of the arena. Fans started to notice. Some still screamed for the Brazilian, chanting his name, pounding their fists against railings. But others began to fall quiet, watching the way Chuck moved, watching how much didn't happen, how easily the older man avoided what was supposed to be overwhelming speed. The silence of part of the crowd pressed against the shouts of the rest, a battle of its own in the stands. The Brazilian pushed harder. Sweat was already collecting at his hairline. He ducked, circled, lunged again. This time he drove forward with everything, cutting off angles, pressing Chuck toward the corner. He shouted as he rushed, throwing his whole body into the trap. The crowd surged to its feet. Yes, this was the moment. The prediction was coming true. Norris was caught. Except he wasn't. At the very last instant, Chuck planted his back foot, pivoted, and redirected the Brazilian's arm with a short, precise motion. The force of the younger man's own attack carried him past, straight into the corner pad. His shoulder smacked the padding with a dull, heavy thud that everyone heard. The sound rang in the air like a warning bell. Gasps ripped across the arena. Thousands of breaths caught at once, like the entire building had inhaled and forgotten how to let go. Phones shook in raised hands. The Brazilian stumbled, turning back too quickly, his balance off. His grin was gone. His chest heaved faster than it should have a minute into a fight. He blinked, eyes scanning, not just his opponent, but the crowd, as if the noise could give him back the certainty he had walked in with. Chuck didn't chase him. He didn't step forward. He simply stood there, shoulders relaxed, eyes sharp, waiting. The calm was louder than any punch could have been. The cameras zoomed in, showing every line on his face, every inch of stillness. And on the big screen overhead, the younger fighter's expression told a story his mouth could no longer cover. The smirk that had fueled weeks of interviews was gone. His lips pressed tight, his jaw twitched, sweat traced down his cheek in the harsh light. For the first time, there was no performance, no theater, just the raw outline of doubt. In 30 seconds, the promise he'd made to the world had already begun to crack, and the whole arena saw it happen. Midway through the round, time felt elastic, every second stretching and snapping back with the rhythm of breath and movement. The crowd had shifted too. What had begun as laughter and chants of 30 seconds was now a thick hum, the kind of restless murmur that belongs in courtrooms or churches. Every shuffle of feet on the canvas carried through the arena as if the microphones had been turned up. The Brazilian pushed forward again. Sweat had gathered at his temples, running down into his jawline, leaving dark streaks on his chest. He threw a combination, jab high, hook low, level change for the takedown. It was crisp, practiced, quick. Cameras caught the angles, commentators rushed to describe them. And then, with almost no effort, Chuck tilted his shoulder, stepped half an inch offline, and the sequence died in his hands. He guided the jab into air, shrugged off the hook with his forearm, and let the takedown attempt run into a blank wall of space. The crowd gasped. You could hear the gasp clearly. Tens of thousands of people reacting like a single body. And then Chuck answered with something so simple it became devastating. A short hook into the ribs, sharp and precise, a reminder of where lungs live. The sound was dull, meaty, undeniable. The Brazilian flinched before he could stop himself. His back foot slid. His breath caught. From the second tier, someone yelled, "He felt that!" The words spread like ripples. The Brazilian snarled, hiding the pain with noise. He surged again, snapping his head side to side, fists flying with more rage than rhythm. A looping right, a pawing jab, a knee-strike feint that carried no real threat. Chuck moved through each one like water finding the easiest path downhill. His defense wasn't flashy, it was precise. A block here, a sidestep there, the small redirections that said, "I've been here before. You won't surprise me." Then came another body shot, smaller this time, almost gentle compared to the last, but placed perfectly into the shoulder joint. The arm recoiled as though it had been unplugged. For a second, the Brazilian's hands didn't know where to be. That second was long enough for the crowd to sense it. The chants changed. At first it was scattered. He's tired. Then a chorus built, row by row. He's tired. He's tired. It wasn't mockery. It was diagnosis. The Brazilian heard it. His grin twitched back onto his face, but his chest betrayed him, pulling for air in jagged gulps. "Come on," he shouted, voice cracking, pointing at Chuck. "Fight me for real." His words echoed, amplified by microphones, fed to the screens overhead. He wanted a brawl, wanted anger, wanted chaos, anything to level the field. Chuck gave him nothing. He just looked at him, eyes calm, face unreadable. That silence cut deeper than any strike. The Brazilian's smirk faltered again. He blinked too much. For the first time, the crowd saw hesitation, not bravado. The younger fighter threw himself into a desperate clinch, finally managing to lock his arms around Chuck's torso. His fans screamed as if victory were seconds away. But inside the hold, the truth was brutal. Chuck's spine stayed straight, his hips turned just enough, his arms slipped inside for leverage. With a subtle shift, just a heel pivot and a small hip turn, the clinch collapsed. The Brazilian squeezed harder, but the tighter he held, the less control he had. Chuck posted a forearm gently against the collarbone, breaking posture, then slid free as if untying a knot. The referee didn't have to intervene. Chuck had already stepped out. The Brazilian spun, breathing heavier now, his chest rising and falling too quickly. His arms felt heavier too, every strike costing more, every grip slipping faster. He tried another rush, but Chuck met it with another body shot, precise under the ribs, where breath lives and dies. The younger man bent, almost imperceptibly, before forcing himself upright again. The crowd erupted, not with celebration, but with recognition. They were watching a man lose the fight not to a single blow, but to accumulation, to the erosion of certainty. Every second was sand slipping out of his hands. He tried one more tactic, yelling. "Hit me!" he barked, pounding his own chest, demanding violence. The crowd booed. Some laughed. Others just stared. Chuck didn't answer. He adjusted his stance, steady, still breathing evenly, eyes locked on his opponent. The silence roared. By now, the big screen showed the Brazilian's face in merciless detail, his jaw tight, his lips pressed together, eyes darting faster than they should. The cracks were visible. His grin was gone entirely, replaced by something rawer, the first flickers of fear. The round's final seconds ticked, the horn hovering close. The Brazilian attacked again, wild, angry, sloppy. Chuck brushed off each attempt like dust. He placed one last straight shot into the solar plexus, clean and centered. The younger man staggered back, his body betraying him, his pride forcing him to stay upright. The horn sounded. The crowd jumped to its feet. Some clapped, some whistled, some simply stared, shaking their heads. They weren't chanting 30 seconds anymore. They weren't laughing. They were waiting. They wanted to see the lesson finish. The Brazilian slumped into his corner, gulping water, coaches shouting frantic instructions he barely processed. His chest heaved, his eyes avoided the cameras. His body already told the story his mouth couldn't rewrite. Chuck sat calmly, almost casually. He drank, spat, never looked away from the man across the ring. His breathing was steady. His silence, once mocked, now pressed on the entire arena like a weight. The shift was complete. The room no longer belonged to the Brazilian, no longer to his boasts. It belonged to the silence that had outlasted noise, and everyone, every fan, every commentator, every person holding a phone in the air was waiting for the same thing: the end. The bell rang for the final round, and the building leaned in. Thousands of bodies pressed forward in their seats as if pulled by the same string. The Brazilian sat on his stool, breathing hard, chest rising too quickly, ice melting against his ribs. His coaches barked orders, hands flying in the air like frantic traffic signals, none of which matched the terrain he had just walked through. Across from him, Chuck sat quietly. He sipped, spat, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and never took his eyes off the younger man. He looked more like someone waiting for a door to open than a man about to fight. When the referee called them back, the crowd roared, but the noise thinned in the ring. The Brazilian bounced once, twice, forcing his legs to look strong. Pride is heavier than muscle, and he carried it to the center. He lunged first, chaining everything he had left into one furious combination: jab, hook, feint high, shoot low. Hands clawed for fabric, head crashing toward the hips. For a heartbeat, he believed he had it. Chuck shifted. A step half the length of a shoe, a hand posting lightly on the crown of the head, hips sliding just out of the lane. The takedown closed on air. The overhand missed by inches. The younger man stumbled through space that no longer existed, caught only by the ropes. The crowd screamed, half in shock, half in awe. "Finish him!" someone yelled, and the cry rolled upward into 100 voices. The Brazilian, red-faced and desperate, obeyed. He launched himself into a clinch, arms cinched around Chuck's torso, driving knees, teeth bared. For his fans, it looked like salvation. For anyone watching closely, it looked like drowning. Inside the hold, Chuck's spine stacked straight, his hips turned off the line, his arms swam to inside position. He moved with the patience of someone opening a stuck drawer, gentle, firm, inevitable. A pivot of the heel, a turn of the hip, and the clinch softened. Chuck's right arm slid under the elbow, his left framed the triceps, and the younger man's balance tipped forward into a trap of his own making. Then the floor rose up. Chuck guided him down, not slammed, but placed, in a clean, sharp arc. The canvas caught him with a muffled thud, his breath bursting out in a short gasp. Phones flashed, capturing the moment from every angle. The arena detonated, people on their feet, cups spilling, voices climbing into one wild storm. But inside the ropes, there was only stillness. Chuck had already settled into control, cross-body, knee-pinning hips, arm folded neatly. The Brazilian thrashed, bucked, bridged. Chuck moved with him, letting energy spill away like water against stone. He could have hit. He could have wrenched. Instead, he removed options. A wrist pinned, a shoulder isolated, a chin turned just enough to erase leverage. Each second was subtraction. The younger man tried one last scramble, hips sliding, legs pushing for daylight. Chuck caught a wrist, pressed it down with two knuckles, slid his other hand under the elbow, and lifted just enough. The arm bent into a lever, not yet extended, but undeniably caught. The crowd inhaled together. They could see it. They could feel it. Chuck leaned closer. The cameras caught his lips moving, and though his voice stayed low, the words carried anyway. "Pride breaks faster than bones," he said. "Remember that." The Brazilian froze. Rage flickered, then fear, then something cleaner. Realization. He stopped fighting. His chest sank with a long exhale. The referee dove in, waving his arms. "That's it." The bell followed, sharp and final. Chuck released before the sound finished. His hands left the wrist, the elbow, returning gravity to its work. He backed away, palms open. The Brazilian rolled to his side, clutching his arm. Not broken, but humbled. His face told the story his mouth never would. His coaches rushed in, but he waved them back, sitting upright on his own. Across the ring, Chuck stood still, offering a hand. It took a long second, but the younger man accepted. The pull to his feet was gentle. They leaned close, sharing words the cameras couldn't steal. The Brazilian nodded once. Chuck nodded back. The referee raised Chuck's hand, though the arena hardly needed the confirmation. The noise rolled in waves. Relief first, then recognition, then thunder. Fans who had come to laugh were standing with open mouths. Those who had bet against him were clapping with both hands. Children perched on shoulders screamed until their voices cracked. The chant of 30 seconds had died hours ago. Now, the chant was nothing more complicated than his name. Chuck raised one hand, low and modest, and the ovation swelled again. He touched the younger man's shoulder on the way to his corner, then bowed his head for half a breath. A private gesture from older rooms without cameras. He turned for the exit, and the crowd parted for him instinctively. No security needed. At the tunnel's mouth, he paused. The roar thinned into something like silence. He glanced back. The Brazilian, now standing straighter, lifted his gloves in a small salute. Chuck answered with a nod almost too subtle to see. Then he disappeared into the dark. By morning, the internet would be flooded. Slow-motion clips of the takedown, thumbnails with bold captions, analysts replaying the final words. Talk shows would chase punchlines and miss the point. But the people who had been there would remember something else. They would remember how a boast about 30 seconds turned into a lesson about a lifetime. That night, everyone in the arena learned what the young fighter had felt on the mat. Real strength doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It leaves no room for doubt, no place to stand but the truth.